Moving on to Izzet, we have Beacon Bolt. Beacon Bolt is a 3-mana sorcery. Beacon Bolt deals damage to target creature equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. Jumpstart. So this is a card I was initially very low on, and I'm still not totally there on it yet. But now that we have the full spoiler, seeing the kind of cantrips we have access to in Discovery as we just saw, I do think that the enablers are there to get this to at least 3 damage on turn 3. So it's actually killing stuff. And the upside on this is notably high, especially moving into the late game when you can jumpstart it, just having one of these in the graveyard. If there's like a giant thing in play, you can discard a land, Beacon Bolt it for 1,000,000. It's almost certainly going to be a terminate past like turn 5 or 6. So there is upside on Beacon Bolt. It's a card I'd probably only run like 2 of, but I do think that moving into the mid and late game, it actually is reasonably strong, because it does give you the ability to answer a lot of creatures that Izzet would traditionally have a reasonably tough time answering due to their damage-based removal. This one can potentially do so much damage that it kind of side skirts that. So while I don't think this is a 4 of, I think it is a solid role player in the Dimir deck. Another cool thing about the Jumpstart cards is that you can like run a small number of them and you still kind of get to see a fair amount of them throughout the course of the game. Chart the Course is going to be so good in like the Izzet decks. Chart the Course becomes insane in the Izzet decks moving forward. But yeah, I think Beacon Bolt is solid. I was initially really low on it, but I now see where and how you would apply it in a deck, and I'm like, I'm okay with it. Beamsplitter Mage is a blue-red 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Beamsplitter Mage, if you control one or more other creatures that spell could target, choose one of those targets. Copy that spell. The copy targets the chosen creature. So this is like a cool card. It can enable some super sweet stuff. It's good with Quasi-Duplicate, for example. This is like if you're playing Quasi-Duplicate, you're playing Beamsplitter Mage, I would presume. What other things you could target this with? I can't think of much in that color combination. I'm sure that there's something, but nothing immediately comes to mind. But like starting off with Quasi-Duplicate, you make more Beamsplitter Mages, you play things on Beamsplitter Mages and like put stuff everywhere and like play one pump spell and like attack, I guess is the joke. So it seems like a fun meme card. I don't know how competitive it is. It's probably not very, but it's possible that there are some interactions that arise where you're just kind of playing a grizzly bear, and then if your opponent gives you the window to go off, you just hammer them. So if that's what's going on, then this card is reasonable. It depends upon like how all in you are. If you have to shove every time, that strategy usually doesn't work. If you can kind of tiptoe around things and then capitalize when they give you a window, that's more reasonable. So we'll have to see how things develop with this card and what kind of things people want to play alongside it. Here we have Crackling Drake. This is the Izzet, member of the 4-mana cycle. Blue, blue, red, red, star 4, Flying Drake. Crackling Drake's power is equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. When Crackling Drake enters the battlefield, draw a card. This card is actually pretty strong. The fact that it immediately replaces itself makes it a bit resilient to removal, at least on a card economy basis. And just like Storm Beacon, the upside on this card is very high. Moving into the mid and late game, this can kill your opponent very quickly. And it's at a very low opportunity cost. You're just playing like what would it be about a 3/4, 4/4 that draws a card on turn 4 with the potential to be bigger than that. And then if it survives, you get to hammer them. Like if it dies, it dies. It drew a card, who cares? But if it doesn't die, they're taking a bunch of damage. So Crackling Drake is a card that I am pretty excited to play, especially alongside another Izzet flying dragonish thing that we will get to in a second. So like the prospect of an Izzet mid-range deck is interesting to me. You could also play this alongside Enigma Drake if you want to go all in on that route. Playing both this and Enigma Drake does put a fair amount of pressure on your opponent to have a high density of removal spells to not just die to one or the other. You have a pretty high density of must-kill threats at that point. So that's another route you can go if you want to. I'm more just with my playstyle in line with the value game. I don't like shoving like that. But it might be a viable option to go in that direction. Either way, Crackling Drake is a very strong card. And it is worth noting this card is immune to graveyard interaction, because if they exile it, it still counts. It counts in graveyard and exile. So you can't graveyard interact this card. They did a good job of making it so the Izzet cards don't care about graveyard interaction, because they shouldn't. That'd be dumb. Fire Mind's Research, Bible Thump. I feel bad for this card. It is a blue-red enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on Fire Mind's Research. You can pay 1 in a blue, remove 2 charge counters from Fire Mind's Research to draw a card. Or 1 in a red, remove 5 charge counters from Fire Mind's Research. It deals 5 damage to any target. This card is pretty slow, and the very, very high density of main deckable enchantment removal likely prevents this card from being playable. But even in a vacuum, the amount you have to invest for this card to be good, or at least like time-wise. So you like play Fire Mind's Research on turn 2, does nothing. Play a spell, it still did nothing. Play another spell, it still did nothing. You can then either impact the board in some meaningful way, or pay 2 and cantrip it. You have now spent 4 mana to cantrip a card. Cool. Just do 4 mana to cantrip the Fire Mind's Research. Or you can keep playing spells, and then in 3 turns you will be able to deal 5 damage or something. It's just, like, it seems glacially slow. It is certainly possible if you can make some kind of storm deck where you have Electromancer in play, and just, like, do a bunch of stuff, and then that becomes plausible. But outside of that, and again, with the very high density of main deckable enchant removal, and how vulnerable this is to removal, like, you have 4 charge counters on this, tapped out, and they kill it, it feels rancid. So, it's not a card I would like to play. It's sweet. It's really sweet. It's cool design. It's awesome. But it's from a competitive standpoint, I do not believe it is a card that will have much success. Gobbling Electrum. This is a reprint of a pretty well-known card. Just a blue-red 2/2 instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. This can enable some pretty degenerate things. This is a cornerstone of the modern Storm deck, although I do believe they've switched to Baral mostly, although they still play a couple Electromancer. This can enable some pretty cool stuff. It makes your mana efficiency much greater. It's weird that you want to play this in a deck with a high spell density to kind of go off, but it then turns on your opponent's cheap removal that may otherwise be dead, so there's a weird tension there. But the ceiling on this card is very high. It can enable some really, really powerful things. There aren't any spells that really create mana, like Rituals or Mana Morphos in Modern, so you can't get too degenerate with this in Standard, but you can, like, make Discovery actual Preordain. Like, that's a thing Electromancer can do. That seems aight. So even just, like, those little efficiencies like that can actually really help out a deck like Izzet mid-range. So this is a card I'm going to mess around with, see what kind of shells we can throw it into, how much it really enables given the current card pool. But it obviously has a pedigree of being successful. It just mainly depends upon what the supporting cast is around it this time around. Now we have one of the best named cards in the set, Hypothesizzle. 5-mana instant, draw 2 cards, then you may discard a non-land card. When you do, Hypothesizzle deals 4 damage to target creature. I actually wish that this was a constructed playable card, like you just made the rates better for constructed, because I really like the dynamic of draw cards, discard 1. If you discard a land, you got to discard a bad card. But if you don't discard a land, you actually get an upside effect. That's a cool dynamic that I like. This card seems good and limited, but power level is much too low for constructed, unfortunately, as much as I do like this card's name and design. Ionize. Ionize is colorless blue-red instant. Counter target spell. Ionize deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. This is the alternative to the cancel with Surveil. If you care more about the incidental damage, this is the option. Or if it is easier for you to cast red-blue than it is blue-blue. There's certainly, like in the Jeskai deck, that would be the case. So Ionize might end up being the cancel of choice over the Surveil one for mana considerations or incidental damage considerations. In either case, it's certainly playable. It's just depending upon what you're looking for in your control deck, which effect incidental upside you care about more between the counterspells. Here's the Izzet Guild Mage, also pretty medium. 2 mana, 2/2, draw a card for 4 mana. X and a red, copy target instant sorcery spell you control. You can run mana cost X. You may choose a target for the copy. That's like way too expensive to do anything productive with it. So not really for constructed as the other guild mages. Here is one of my favorite cards in the set, and probably the first one I'm going to build around in Niv-Mizzet Perun. It is triple blue, triple red for a 5/5 legendary dragon wizard. Niv-Mizzet cannot be countered, has flying. Whenever you draw a card, Niv-Mizzet Perun deals 1 damage to any target, and whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. So this is a card I want to play alongside Crackling Drake, because they both are like unremovable profitably. Because if you cast a spell to kill Niv-Mizzet, you draw a card, and then Niv-Mizzet deals 1 damage something for free. So it's whenever either player casts it. So you tap out, play Niv-Mizzet. They can't counter it, because it can't be countered. And then once it's in play, if they remove it, you draw a card, it replaces itself, you win on the exchange, cool, move on to the next turn. If they do not kill it, you get to untap and start like charting the course, bolt something, like discovery, draw 2, shock something, like you just kind of get to go off, especially if you have like an Electromancer in play if you're going that deep. But even without one, like it gives all of your spells essentially spell damage 1, replace itself. That's a really powerful emblem to have in play. Like your Lava Coil just draws a card, deals 5 damage instead. Your Lightning Strike draws a card, deals 4 damage instead. That card is insane. The problem with Niv-Mizzet Perun is that triple blue, triple red is kind of mathematically incastable. It's a little problem. You have to run Izzet Guildgate, which isn't the worst, considering that Steam Vents isn't necessarily a tapped land when you don't need it to be, so you're only running 4 tapped lands with the Guild Gates. You're still in reasonable territory there, and I do believe the upside on Niv-Mizzet Perun is worth it. But it is worth noting that you actually can't cast this card consistently unless you're playing Izzet Guildgate, which is really funny. There are other options you can go to. For example, I've tried shells where you use Sarkin to try and cast this more efficiently, and earlier you can use Unclaimed Territory as the extra dual land for this card, and then actually allows you to get Nicol Bolas in there. The mana base is a little sketchy, but I did the math on it, and it's within the ballpark. So that's an option you have available to you if you want to do that. But just in general, I'm very, very high on Niv-Mizzet Perun. Again, because the floor is very high. You play this as a 5/5. It's going to block a lot of stuff. If they kill it, you win on the exchange, whatever. And if you untap with it, they are dead. You just get to bury them. You just have a single chart the course. You go off. So I am very here for Niv-Mizzet Perun. It's one of my favorite cards, first card I'm going to be building around. Now we have another Izzet card, one I'm less excited about, but is still reasonable. In Ral Izzet Viceroy. Ral Izzet Viceroy is a 5 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker. +1, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. -3, Ral Izzet Viceroy deals damage to target creature equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile in your graveyard, so it just storm beacons them. And -8, you get an emblem with whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell. This emblem deals 4 damage to any target, and you draw 2 cards. So Ral is a pretty prototypical planeswalker. It's just the vanilla formula of +1 draw a card, -3 kill a thing. Like, it's pretty stock. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means it's boring. I do think that Ral is not the best. It depends upon how much you can enable the -3 by turn 5. If you can make the -3 deal about 4 damage by turn 5 consistently, then Ral has the capacity to come down, kill most things on an empty board, untap, start plussing. Then you're in reasonable territory. It's also worth noting that Ral has one of the best ultimates ever on a planeswalker. It pretty much instantly wins the game. It's like on par with Teferi's ultimate. It's actually a little bit better. at least it wins faster. Like they can, if you're behind and you ultimate Teferi, you can still lose. If you're behind and you ultimate Ral, you're good. You're gonna win. You just need a single spell and you're good. You get there. So that's like legitimate upside. The fact that Ral is a very scary clock for your opponent. If it gets to 8, the game is over. That's it. They lose. So that hard clock is notable. The fact that it, unlike Teferi, doesn't like untap lands to protect itself the same turn while also plussing, obviously not as good. But Teferi is kind of the outlier and is largely busted, so it's not necessarily fair to compare Ral against it, even though that's kind of exactly the comparison is going to happen because they're both 5-mana planeswalkers in blue. So I don't hate Ral. I'll probably play it a bit. The upside on it is solid, and it's a reasonable card. It's like, it's boring, it's not bad. Like, it's important to note that, like, boring doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. There are a bunch of planeswalkers that are the stupid +1 draw card, -3 kill a thing formula that are totally fine. That's what Teferi is. Granted, there's more text than that, but Teferi's also in that basic formula. So I'll definitely be trying out Ral. I think that the upside is there, and it seems like okay enough if you're putting in the work to make his -3 actually have text. Sonic Assault is a 3-minute instant. Tap target creature. Sonic Assault deals 2 damage to that creature's controller with Jumpstart. This is a reasonably powerful card in Limited. You get to do stuff like tap a creature, deal 2 damage, untap, Jumpstart, tap a creature, deal 2 damage, attack my dudes, kill you. That's not a situation that's really going to come unconstructed too much. It's possible. Again, if like there was a prowess deck or something, this card might garner a spot in it, but I don't believe there's anything like that, and even then it's still a little bit too inefficient for constructed. Here we have the full meme, 1000-Year Storm. 1000-Year Storm is a 6-mana enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it for each other instant and sorcery spell you've cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, 1000-Year Storm is vulnerable to, as we've talked about, the wide plethora of main deckable enchantment removal that is present within the format. It is also a 6-mana do-nothing, which is a fairly large liability. Like if you just play this on turn 6, you just did nothing on turn 6, you are almost certainly dead. But the upside of this card, if you are able to untap with like any notable amount of mana, it is very likely your opponent is dead. This card spirals out of control very quickly. Now, granted, it only really does that if you have any spell that makes mana. And as far as I know, there is no spell in Standard that makes mana outside of, like, Apex of Power, but that doesn't count. My inclination is that 1000-Year Storm is more of a casual card, not something we're likely going to really be seeing too much of in Constructed. But with the right enablers, mainly something that produces mana, treasures, things that produce treasures, for example, may be the answer. But as long as you can start going off, like, it spirals very quickly. Like, the first spell you cast is just a normal spell, and that kind of sucks. But then the next one gets reverberated, and then the next one gets triple. Like, there's 3 of them, and then 4. Like, it spirals very fast. So, upside in this card is pretty high, but in a actual competitive game of Standard, I can't ever see you getting a window to resolve this and not die and get to untap and have things and kill them. It just doesn't seem particularly plausible. But I'll certainly try it out. We have Dragon Ott's got a reprint. It is a 3-mana 1/3 fairy wizard with flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Dragon Ott's gets +2/+0 until end of turn. I don't think that this card is going to make it in the year 2018. Its toughness is a little bit too low. Like, think about it like this. You have to do work to make this a 3/3. Like, and the ceiling is obviously higher than that. You can just kind of, like, go off and, like, potentially kill them. But you have to do a thing to make this a 3/3. It's not even a 3/3 by default. So, while there is, like, upside to Dragon Otts, and in conjunction with Gobbling Electrum and like Jumpstart cards, you could do a lot of stuff in the same turn. But I'm not convinced that the best payoff for doing all of that stuff in the same turn is Dragon Otts. Piston Fist Cyclops. is 3 mana, hybrid, 4/3 defender. As long as you've cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, Piston Fist, Cyclops can attack as though it did not have defender. This is another limited card. There are better options in constructed. 4/3 is like pretty medium to bad. Ooh, and now we get to one of the better Izzet cards, in my opinion. Expansion and Explosion. Expansion is double hybrid instant. Copy target instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less. You may choose new targets for the copy. And Explosion is X blue blue red red. Explosion deals X damage to any target, and target player draws X cards. So this is the Izzet Sphinx's Revelation. It's 1 mana less efficient. Sphinx's Revelation was 3x. This is 4x. Sphinx's Revelation, gain life, help you stabilize. This can deal damage, potentially killing a thing, helping you stabilize, although it's harder to get this big enough to do that. But you can actually, in theory, run a deck with just explosions and no other win conditions and just kill them with explosions. And there's like upside in doing that, just completely deading all of your opponent's Vraska's, Contempts, removals, whatever. I'm not sure you need to do that in Izzet because you actually have a lot of removal resilient things with Niv-Mizzet and stuff. But if you want to go that route, Explosion does give you the ability to just, with Explosion and even like mission briefing for additional virtual copies, just like control the game, explosion, kill you. So that is a route you can go down. It's a little bit mana intensive, but the later you get in the game, the less it matters. That the first mana matters. So past like turn 8-ish, this is about the same power level as Sphinx's Revelation, and Sphinx's Revelation was nutso. So I definitely expect Explosion to see a fair amount of play. It has a worse floor than Sphinx's Revelation, but that's okay because you have the other side in Expansion. Expansion can copy a target instant or sorcery spell, convert mouse 4 or less. So you can use Expansion as essentially a negate. Like if you play a thing, they counter it, you can Expansion copy the counter it. So it can defend your spells in that way. You can replicate cantrips or draw spells, at least cheaper ones. You can replicate discard spells. There's a lot of various applications for Explosion. A lot of them are pretty niche, but it does give you something to do with this card in the earlier turns before Explosion gets to the mana threshold where it becomes a reasonable thing to do. So that flexibility is better. I really wish that Response was the other side of Explosion. If Response was the other side of Explosion, that would be bonkers. I understand why they didn't do that, but I wish they did. So yeah, I think this card will show up. I don't know if you can play 4 of it. If you want to do the win condition thing, you have to, but it seems fine. Next card is Invert. Invert has the prestigious honor of being the second card in the past 2 years to get insta-errated because they forgot text. Invert is hybrid blue-red instant. Switch the power and toughness of each of up to 2 target creature. It's supposed to say until end of turn. It is until end of turn. It just doesn't say until end of turn. They forgot that line of text. The other side of this card is Invent. Invent is a 6 mana instant. Search your library for an instant and or sorcery card. Reveal them. Put them into your hand. Shuffle your library. So Invert is only really going to be good when it is causing a creature to die. You do get to flip 2 things. So you could like flip your creature and flip theirs and change combat math, and maybe that makes things better. But you need to be playing this in an Izzet deck that also is playing creatures. So you like the combat math matters. You could also just essentially play this card for Invent. If there are particular instant and sorceries your deck relies upon, or you just want some value. Invent is not the worst draw, like tutor 2 in the world. For 6 mana at instant speed, you can use it as a punish. You don't like have to tap out for it. It's reasonably low cost. And then if you could ever find any leverage for Invert, then that becomes in the realm of playability. I think the main problem with this card is finding any way to leverage Invert. I'm just struggling to think of ways you can do that. It's not going to kill anything unless it's just a thing that is 0 power. Even like when you're pairing, like say for example, you like invert an Aurelia and then shock it. Like that's not good for you. That wasn't a good exchange. If you like invert 2 things and then use a sweeper, that's closer to reasonable, but even that's like eh. So you kind of need creatures of your own in play, and then to use Invert as a combat trick, and I'm just not sure how much that's actually going to alter the combat math in a way that matters. So, kind of like Invent, not really here for Invert.